Continuing our reading in Abraham Hannibal and the Battle for the Throne by Francis Summers Cox, Chapter 19, The Swedes Move South. The date is February to September, the year 1708. At first, this war with King Charles of Sweden seemed nothing but stop, start, stop, start. After all, it had been already going on, stopping and starting, for 8 years. And even when things were moving, it was often very slowly. 50 miles in 1 week was good going for an army. It was definitely all much too slow for Abraham. Aren't I ever going to get a chance to prove myself? What we need is a battle, but Peter's always so cautious. And then the Swedish army ground to a standstill again and rested for 2 months, waiting for grass to grow for their horses. They had a hard time of it, though, with the countryside bitterly cold and almost empty of food, and the country people round about quickly grew to hate the foreign soldiers in their yellow and blue uniforms, forcing their way into their tiny farms, demanding on pain of death that they hand over their secret stores. Abraham started a new job. Along with keeping the Tsar's things clean and tidy, he used to take turns with the other young page boys, acting as the Tsar's secretary. His Russian had got good enough by now. The worst bit was when Peter suddenly had a bright idea in the middle of the night, and he was always having bright ideas, and scribbled it on slates with chalk by the light of a little lamp. That was difficult to puzzle out the next morning and copy up in best. In tents and inns and places and huts, Abraham would sit and write up the Tsar's instructions and plans. Peter used to tease him about it. So, my young African, I'll bet you never thought back to your jungle that you'd be ending up writing laws for the Tsar of Russia. Not bad for a little black slave boy, eh? Actually, Abraham wasn't so little anymore. He was growing taller and broader, though he was still not full grown. And of course, next to the Tsar, no one looked tall. But he was pleased to be secretary to Peter. This is one up from being a page boy. He must really trust me. One day I'll somehow make my name, and I'll be free, and I'll get to France at last. I'll find the Sun King. He'll see what us Ethiopians are made of. Peter was able to go to St. Petersburg for Easter and cheer himself through another bad fever by ordering flower seeds, cuttings, and baby trees, and songbirds by the thousand to beautify his new city. He even found enough energy to order all the nobles in Moscow to come to St. Petersburg and start building palaces there. The big move was really beginning. But while Peter was in St. Petersburg with Catherine, something happened that brought his fever back and had him in bed till he heard that the Swedes were on the move again, and he dragged himself up to face them. Baby Catherine died. 3 children he and Catherine had had so far. 3 children and 3 deaths. The Swedes started marching east in June. It was a wet summer. The horses suffered horribly, dragging, struggling, cannons and wagons through the mud, falling dead with exhaustion and hunger. The soldiers were ragged, sick, and hungry, and time again they sank up to their waists in the thick mud as they marched. A whole extra division of their army was supposed to be coming down from the north with plenty of supplies, but it didn't arrive, and still it didn't arrive. But all the same, the Swedes managed to cross the last of the big rivers between them and Moscow. Now it was only 300 miles to go, with no barriers in between. The Russian camps were full of legends about the blonde young Swedish king, how he'd been killing wolves and bears single-handedly since he was a little boy, and how he'd crowned himself king when he was 15, first led an army into battle and victory when he was 18, and how he knew neither fear nor love. Tsar Peter had a black and white picture of King Charles. Abraham used to stare at that hard young face and wonder what made him dare lead his little country against the huge mass of Russia. King Charles started to fill his dreams at night. That's him over there, rearing up on his stallion at the head of his troops, his sword flashing and slicing. Isn't he young? What cold blue eyes, cold and hard. He doesn't know what fear is. No armor at all, nothing to protect that blonde head, his chest or his back. I'll gallop up there and force him to fight me in a single combat. It was a dream that Abraham started to have again and again. Abraham and Charles always fighting, the battle roaring around them, but the two of them in single combat, rearing and wheeling on their horses, their swords thrusting and clanging, until at last Charles fell, bleeding, on the battlefield, and Abraham triumphantly showed Peter the body of his defeated enemy. Now that the Swedish army had crossed the last of the big rivers that lay between them and Moscow, Peter knew what orders to give to stop them marching further. As the Swedish soldiers looked eastward across the flat plains ahead of them, they saw what Abraham had seen in Poland the year before, the red glow of burning fields, forests, and villages, the sky heavy and black with smoke. This time Peter's soldiers were not scorching the earth of a foreign people. They were laying waste their own land. Between King Charles and Moscow, his heart's desire, lay a huge new desert, with not a blade of grass for his horses, nor a grain of wheat for his men. And he knew that northwards the way to St. Petersburg was no better. Charles waited and waited, and still the other part of his army, with its baggage wagons, loaded with food and uniforms, ammunition, blankets, and medicines, did not arrive. But go back was something Charles would never do. So in the end, as autumn was approaching, Charles went to the only way left, south, away from Moscow, away from St. Petersburg, further and further away from Sweden and Swedish friends, but at least toward farmlands that had not been burnt and barns that had not been emptied of food. And at last the extra Swedish baggage wagons came, slowly rumbling down from the north. But this time the Russians did strike and destroyed the lot. That's the end of chapter 19.